I'm Krzysztof Zablocki, Merrowing _ on Twitter, and I created an app called Foldify, which is probably the most known stuff I created. And I also work with FLASHTALK Global Services right now with US. And I'm basically going to talk about a few areas when you can improve your iOS workflow. And I'm going to start with the setup of the project, which is a way to specify all the warnings and stuff we do. Because for me, whenever I create an iOS project, I always set the same stuff up. So I always set the same warnings. I always set the same scripts. I have set of scripts which I like. And I always, for example, treat warnings as errors. So I created a tool because Xcode templating sucks and it's not documented. So if you have an Xcode template for your project and an Xcode update, it stops working. And it's also very hard to create a complete setup for a template because there is no real documentation. Everything you can find online will get outdated very soon. And I created a tool called Crafter, which allows you to specify a syntax in a way that basically looks like git ignore file. So in your home folder, you can specify a DSL, like Ruby DSL syntax that enables a bunch of warnings, options. You can add scripts, and you can, for example, even have arbitrary code execute. And what happens next? And what happens next? You just from terminal, you just on the folder when you have the Xcode project, you just call Crafter, and it will apply your settings. It can even guide you, so you can have options. So, for example, you write Crafter, and it asks you, well, do you want to do TDD? And then by default, you can have it add Kiwi and add pods and add scripts. And one of the scripts I always add is very helpful when testing the application. So how many times did you have some QA guy coming to you and saying, well, this doesn't work, and then you look at the app and you have there are different ways to know if the app is current, but when we work, we iterate very often. So we have like daily builds or maybe even few builds a day, and it's always a question like how do you know if that's the newest one? Is that with your changes applied or not? So people usually set stuff in settings bundle, but then you have to close the app, you have to go to the settings, select the application, see, okay, that's the current one. So this was actually inspired by NS conference talk about Flipboard tools, and I wrote it like a day after the conference. And it's basically a script that you can add to your build phases. And whenever you build an application, it will dynamically create an icon, grabbing the version from the playlist, grabbing the branch which you are using from Git, and also the hashtag for the commit. So whenever someone comes to you and it's not working, you just press the home button and you see on the icon, okay, well, that's outdated. You should update your test version. And that's very simple, and Crafter actually adds this script as default. Now, many people have talked about AppCode here, and I think there is a reason for that, because AppCode is so much better for actually writing code. I know it looks Javish, it is Java, and I hate that, but it's definitely worth using because in Xcode, sure, you can run the code, you can write some code, but good luck even comparing the refactoring power. And as you can see here on the screenshot, it's actually extracting method. So just to do some refactoring and have smaller methods, which we should have, you just select some code, press like a shortcut, and then it actually already proposes the name, the variables, and everything else, which is great, because in Xcode you'd have to create your own method, you have to create the params, and then you have to modify your code. But here it will actually do it for you, because it can resolve and see which part, of your selection, what it is using outside the selection. So it will add it as params, which is really, really useful. And this is just a little bit of the features, because if you do TDD, for example, and even if you don't do TDD, but I prefer to write interface first, the way I use it, instead of first creating a method and then using it. Because if you do the TDD way, you'd first write the interface. So you first do do something, and then you actually create that method. And in Xcode, you would have to create that method manually. In AppCode, you just press Alt-Enter, and it creates that method for you and jumps to that method so you can start implementing, which is really helpful when writing tests. And like John said before, you can like extract methods, modify params and stuff like that very quickly. So it's really, really powerful. And they even have like REST client built in AppCode. So if you want to test your web services, you don't even need to buy another tool. You just go to tools, and there is like REST API client. And they even started working on interface builder for AppCode, which is going to be probably better than Xcode at some point, because AppCode supports plugins, which we all would like to have for Xcode, which we won't get because we had it on the Xcode 3 and they removed it. So if you never played with AppCode, you should really, really give it a try. And what I always say for AppCode, you have to really spend a week just using AppCode, because otherwise, if you don't know the shortcuts, you will prefer Xcode anyway, because we feel more efficient than we use the tool that we feel more efficient with. But when you force yourself, it's actually really good. And one of the other tools I want to talk about, and it's actually a plugin for Xcode and AppCode, and it's code injection, which is really, really cool. And it's basically doesn't require you to recompile the whole project. So as you are working, this is especially useful when you work with graphics, physics. For example, when I worked on Foldify, I had to modify a bunch of params, and just to see the result, I would have to rebuild the whole project, which for Foldify, which is like 1,000 files, it's kind of hard. So this is really useful because this lets you recompile just a single file. So as you're working on an algorithm on physics or graphics, you can just press a shortcut for recompilation, and it takes like a second, and you can see the results. Like the guy here is changing the colors. And it's all you get. You don't need to do the whole project rebuild. So whenever working with graphics, physics, basically anything that requires lots of param changes, this is a very efficient way of doing that. And it's supported by both Xcode and AppCode. And if you want to play with algorithms, or if you use Twitter a lot of people build with gists of like some code sample and stuff like that. And it's kind of hard to just go create new Xcode project just to run the code and see if it works or not, or if someone is asking for advice. And CodeRunner is an answer to that. It's really useful because you can just open it, you just paste in code, it can recognize the language, and you can just run it without creating a new project, without doing anything. So it's very efficient for playing with some algorithms and testing different stuff. And it supports a bunch of languages as well. So I actually use this whenever someone asks me for help on Twitter. Now the question is how you can build faster, because we all would like to compile faster. Even if you have the new Retina MacBook Pro, it could still be faster. The first thing you can do is you can change the debug builds to use Dwarf, but without the DSIM, because it's not really necessary if you are connected to a debugger on Mac. So you can disable that right now, and it's going to already cut a few seconds from your build times. But what's really useful is using RAM disk, and you can use RAM disk for both iOS simulator and derived data, which is going to say, like, depending on which machine you have, if it's older, then it's going to be a bigger boost, because the new Retina MacBooks have really fast SSDs. But it's still a boost even for the newest machines. And this is actually from some article, and that's the difference between SSD and RAM disk. Obviously, which one is faster, you can see. And this is a huge difference. This was, I think, 500 per second SSD. So it's really a big difference. And if you have 16 gigs of RAM, it's quite easy to allocate like 4 gigs for iOS simulator and derived data. And then I will be like, I have found a script which sets up everything, and I'm gonna share that either on my blog or I'm gonna tweet it. You can just ask me on Twitter. But I've been testing that, and I gave it to a few friends as well, and we all seen improvements in performance. For example, my project compiles in like 3 seconds, which is great. One of the other things you can use some nice tools is finding issues. And I really like using Charles whenever I want to find networking issues. So you can think your app is sending one request, but you never know. Like you can even see it for, like from debugging. It's not that easy to find it. But if you open Charles, it's totally like man-in-the-middle attack. So you see exactly all the requests that your app is doing. And when I was working in London, we were working on the Sun Goals app, and we actually had this issue that we got like duplicated responses, but we couldn't track it. And then we opened Charles and we see like, okay, instead of like every request is repeated twice, one after another. And this was really useful for inspecting other apps as well. For example, MyFitnessPal. I'm a bit of a geek when it comes to fitness, and I wanted to play with their API, and they didn't want to give me one. So I opened Charles and found the endpoints for MyFitnessPal. It was extremely easy because most apps don't protect against this kind of attack. So you can use Charles to see, for example, Foldify and what endpoints is it using, or some other app, probably some other app. The other app that I really like to use is Reveal, and there are different alternatives to that. There is Spark Inspector as well. But Reveal is one of the nicest developer tools I have seen, which is rare because it just looks nice. And as you can see, you can visualize your window, the whole layers, but it can also, like, it uses 3D perspective to show you the layering. So you can rotate the view and see, like, okay, actually there are 5 views stacked on each other. So it's really helpful, and you can also modify stuff. So not only do you see it, but you can also like, okay, what if I hide it? Does it kill that issue? And it will change that on the device. So I actually used it a few times to find like weird borders and stuff like that. So I think that's really helpful. And there is also a question how you can deploy smaller apps, because there is a difference between Edge and Wi-Fi connection. And there are 2 apps I'm going to mention, and one of them is called Wasted. And it's basically, we use PNGs for almost everything in iOS. Even if it's not transparent image, even if you could use JPEG with compression and it wouldn't change, because the biggest difference between PNGs and JPEGs are visible on gradients and stuff like that. But it's just industry standard to use PNGs, which is wasteful if you have lots of resources. So for example, Foldify have over 1,000 graphics files. And if I used PNG for everything, that would be very, very heavy. And you can use an app like Wasted on the compiled application, and it will show you how much space you could potentially save, which is really helpful. As you can see, it's analyzing pages here, and they wasted 66 megabytes. That's a lot. And if you think about it, this might be the difference between requiring the user to use Wi-Fi to download your app or just using Edge connection. So this might actually mean a lot of money for you. And most files can be recompressed as JPEGs, or for example, you can have a PNG with partial transparency. And there are also tools you could use, other tools like command line. There is a command line tool from the guy that created PNG Quant that does visual comparison. Because the problem with this kind of algorithm, if you have 1,000 graphics and you just run the script to like, okay, optimize it, but then some images are like you are losing some quality. But the question is, how do you compare it? If after every build you would have to see all the images, or even before the App Store, it's still out of time to look at 2 images and compare. But you cannot compare just the pixel values, because that's not how human vision works. So that wouldn't really reflect the user experience, because sometimes the pixels might be different, like by 20 or 30%, and you still wouldn't be able to tell. And the guy wrote a tool that simulates human vision, and you can use that, and you can see like, okay, it's only 2% difference for a human eye. So it's great because you just save like so much space, but it's not really something most people will notice. So I recommend you Google it out. I'll just share it on Twitter. And there is other app which I've been using for a while. It's pretty old. It's called Slender, and it's basically an app that you can use to verify if your project is still referencing some resources that are not used. And this can happen very often as we work with designers. not all of them use tools like Slicey, where they keep the same name, and sometimes you will get the same resource but with different name, and then people not always clean it up, so sometimes you will be left with the old images inside the project, and this is really helpful for finding those kind of issues. AppCode also has support for that right now, so AppCode can also find unused resources, but this is a bit more powerful because it also analyzes like string formatting, so it can find even images that are like the names are dynamically created. Very simple ones, obviously, it cannot analyze everything, but this is very helpful, and I think it's quite cheap, so worth using, especially when you want to deploy. Well, that's all. I'm out of time almost. So follow me on Twitter, and I will be sharing I will be writing a blog post, and I also can send you some links to the scripts. Thank you.